The whispered bargain. The morning air hung crisp and still over the dusty town of Cedar Ridge, where the scent of sage and leather mixed with the promise of winter. Snow had begun to fall the night before, dusting the wooden buildings and corrals with a thin layer of white that crunched softly underfoot. The auction yard buzzed with the quiet energy of men who understood horses and the hard realities of frontier life. Ezra Blackwood adjusted his weathered hat and surveyed the crowd gathering around the makeshift platform. At 62, he had seen more horse auctions than he cared to count, but today felt different. The desperation in the air was thicker than usual, carried on the breath of men who knew winter was coming and their herds were too small to survive it. Fine animals today, his old friend Silas remarked, stepping up beside him. Though the prices might run higher than expected, Ezra nodded, his grey eyes scanning the horses penned nearby. Each animal represented someone's livelihood, their future. In this unforgiving land, a good horse could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. The auctioneer, a stout man named Henderson, climbed onto the platform and raised his hand for attention. "Gentlemen, we have some exceptional stock today. Let's begin with this fine mare here." As the bidding commenced, Ezra's attention was drawn to a commotion near the edge of the crowd. A young woman stood beside the fence, her blonde hair catching the pale winter light. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days, and her hands gripped the wooden rail with white knuckles. Beside her stood a man in his 30s, dark-haired and bearded, who kept glancing nervously between her and the auction. The woman was striking, with clear blue eyes that held a mixture of determination and fear. There was something about her posture, the way she held herself despite her obvious distress, that spoke of inner strength. She watched each horse being sold with the intensity of someone whose life depended on the outcome. "That's Clara Whitmore," Silas whispered, following Ezra's gaze. "Her husband died last spring, left her with debts and a small ranch she can't manage alone. That's her brother, Thomas, with her. Word is, they're selling their last 3 horses today." Ezra's chest tightened with understanding. Without horses, Clara would have no way to work her land or transport goods to town. She would be forced to sell everything and move to the city, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. The auction continued, each sale bringing Clara's turn closer. When Henderson finally called for her horses, Thomas led the first animal forward, a sturdy bay gelding that moved with the easy grace of a well-trained ranch horse. "This is Thunder," Thomas announced, his voice carrying across the yard. 8 years old, gentle with children, strong enough for any ranch work. The bidding began modestly, but Ezra could see several ranchers eyeing the horse with interest. These were quality animals, the kind that would normally fetch good prices. But Clara needed more than good prices. She needed enough money to save her ranch and her future. That, as Thunder was led away by his new owner, Clara's composure began to crack. Her hands trembled slightly, and she pressed her lips together to keep them steady. The second horse, a spirited chestnut mare named Ember, brought a slightly better price. But Ezra could see it still wasn't enough. When the final horse was brought, for what a magnificent black stallion that moved like liquid shadow, the crowd stirred with appreciation. This was clearly the prize of Clara's small herd, the horse she had hoped would save everything. "This is Midnight," Thomas called out, though his voice cracked slightly on the name. 5 years old, fastest horse in 3 counties, bred from champion stock. The bidding started higher this time, with several wealthy ranchers showing immediate interest. Ezra watched Clara's face as the price climbed, seeing hope flicker in her eyes like a candle flame in wind. But even as the bids increased, he could tell it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly enough to cover her debts and keep her ranch. As Midnight was led away to his new owner, Clara's shoulders sagged with defeat. She had sold her 3 best horses, her last hope, and it still wasn't going to be sufficient. The mathematical reality of her situation was written in every line of her face. That's when she did something that stunned everyone present. Clara stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet yard. "Wait," she called out, her words cutting through the cold air like a blade. "I have one more thing to auction." Henderson frowned, looking confused. "Miss Whitmore, I thought that was your last horse." Clara straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of courage that Ezra recognized from his own difficult moments. "It is," she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do, "but I'm not done." She walked slowly toward the platform, each step deliberate and sure. The crowd watched in puzzled silence as she approached Henderson and whispered something in his ear. The auctioneer's eyes widened in shock, and he shook his head vigorously. "Miss, I can't possibly." "You can," Clara interrupted, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. This is still America. A person can make their own choices about their own life. Thomas rushed forward, grabbing his sister's arm. Clara, no, there has to be another way. She turned to face him, and Ezra could see the fierce love in her expression. Thomas, you have your own family to think about. Your wife, your children. I won't let my problems become yours. But what you're suggesting is my choice to make, Clara said firmly. She looked out over the crowd of men, her gaze steady and unflinching. I'm offering myself in marriage to whoever can pay my debts and help me save my ranch. Not as property, but as a partner, someone who understands that love can grow from respect and shared purpose. The silence that followed was deafening. Men shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. Some looked scandalized, others pitying, but a few, including Ezra, saw the intelligence behind her desperate gamble. She wasn't selling herself as a servant or surrendering her dignity. She was offering a partnership to someone who could help her achieve what she couldn't accomplish alone. In this harsh land, marriages of convenience were not uncommon. What was unusual was her courage in taking control of her own fate. The debt is $800, Clara continued, her voice carrying across the yard, plus enough to keep the ranch running through spring. In return, you get a wife who can cook, manage a household, and work beside you to build something lasting. Ezra found himself stepping forward before he quite realized what he was doing. At his age, he had long resigned himself to a solitary life. His first wife had died 15 years earlier, and he had built a successful ranch through decades of hard work. He was comfortable, respected, but increasingly lonely. Miss Whitmore, he said, his voice carrying the authority of his years. I'd like to make an offer. Clara turned to face him, and their eyes met across the space between them. In that moment, something passed between them, not love, not yet, but recognition. The recognition of two people who understood hard choices and the courage they required. I can cover your debts and provide for your ranch, Ezra continued. But I want to be clear about what I'm offering. Not charity, but partnership. Your ranch would remain yours. Your decisions yours to make. I'm looking for a companion, not a servant. Clara studied his face for a long moment, reading something there that satisfied her. And I would have your word that you're a man of honor. You do, Ezra replied simply. She nodded slowly. Then I accept your offer, Mr. Blackwood. As the crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads in amazement, others muttering about the strangeness of the day, Clara approached Ezra. They stood, facing each other in the falling snow. Two people who had just committed to building a life together based on practical needs and mutual respect. I want you to know, Clara said quietly, that I don't take this lightly. Marriage should mean something, even when it begins as a business arrangement. Ezra nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. In my experience, the strongest foundations are built on honesty and shared purpose. Love, if it comes, will be a gift, but respect and partnership are something we can build together. As they walked away from the auction yard, Thomas fell into step beside them, relief evident in his posture. The 3 horses Clara had sold would go to good homes. Her ranch would survive the winter, and 2 people who had been facing uncertain futures alone now faced them together. The snow continued to fall, covering the town in a blanket of white that promised both challenges and new beginnings. In the distance, the mountains stood eternal, and patient witnesses to countless human stories of survival, hope, and the courage to make impossible choices in impossible times. Clara Whitmore had whispered her desperate offer to an auctioneer who was selling horses. But what she had really done was auction her trust to a man who promised to honor it. In a land where survival often depended on such gambles, it was perhaps the most natural thing in the world. And as Ezra helped her into his wagon for the ride, to what would now be their shared home, both of them understood that they had made a bargain that went far deeper than money or property. They had chosen to face an uncertain future together, with all the challenges and possibilities that choice would bring.